I want to play the audio from Larry Harris, who's the assistant general manager and the director of player personnel for the Golden State Warriors. He appeared with Monty Poole and Dalton Johnson on NBC Sports Bay Area. Excuse me, Larry. And he talked about this offseason.
I just want the fans to know there's going to be some changes. It's going to be all right. It's going to work itself out because change is sometimes a little scary. But I think in the end, I think the goal is to win another championship, and I think we're headed back in that right direction. I truly believe that.
Changes are coming, Larry. What does he mean? I'll pull it together. You talk.
I mean, he seems to be preparing the Warrior fans for changes that would scare them. And I immediately I'm sitting there going, okay, well, wait a second. This was stated the night they made the Jordan Poole trade, but he wasn't talking about, even though they can't formally announce it or formally talk about it, he's not silly enough to think that we don't know about it. We all know about it. So he's not talking about the move that it was already made, in my opinion. He's talking about a move that's coming. And then I'm looking at the roster going, well, wait a second. Would Warrior fans need to be like emotionally braced for a trade involving Moses Moody? No. Would the Warrior fans need to be emotionally, prepared for a trade involving Jonathan Kuminga? Maybe some.
Right.
I personally love Kuminga, and I don't want to see him moved. But I would say generally the answer would be no. And then if you moved Kuminga, what are you getting? You're getting back a player that makes roughly $6 million. Is there a $6 million trade piece coming back for Kuminga that is going to change their fortunes?
Probably not.
I mean, there might be one or two guys that you could think of, but I would say probably not. And if you said Moses Moody, I think he's at 3.9.
Right.
Is there a $3.9 million salaried player that could be coming back for Moses Moody that would make the Warriors a title contender? Probably not. So I read that as there's moves coming post July 1st that are going to make Warrior fans, like the kind of move that would make you'd have to say, hey, Warrior fans, trust us. I know this isn't going to be popular. I'm going to brace you for it. But, I think he's referencing that. And to me, that is about one guy and only one guy. And Steiny said it. It's Klay Thompson.
Well, let me play the first piece of this. And This is from the Dubs Talk podcast from NBC Sports Bay Area. And this is Larry Harris talking about payroll and the commitment of ownership and what that might mean for exactly what you're saying, Larry, post July 1 and what this roster might look like.
I just want the fans to really, truly realize that the ownership group of this organization, it'll come out eventually, but the payroll that these owners are throwing out this year is unlike anything I've ever seen. And, it's one of those things, words are words, but your actions, what are you backing them up with? And you just sit in that room and you're thinking to yourself, I'm looking at 29 other teams in the league and I'm going, we're adding payroll and things that we're going to be doing, that we will have done or going to do after July 1st, adding more payroll. Mm-hmm. And yet yes, it's a concern, and yes, it's a conversation, but it's never stopped Joe and Peter from saying, no, we can't do that. If he'll say to us, is it going to help us win a championship? And we're like, yes, if we think it puts us back in that trajectory and in that conversation, he goes, well, then let's do it.
Let's do it, Larry. Let's do it. And what I hear him talking about is exactly what you were saying in terms of what would that move look like in order to take money, turn it into other money, and maybe increase your chances to win a championship. And it is Klay Thompson. Are you willing to trade Klay Thompson for another guy who makes $40 million a year? 888-957-9570. I wonder what Warrior fans would think in terms of what Larry Harris is talking about, because Joe Lacob has shown a willingness to do bold things, to do big things. And Jordan Poole, yeah, it's a big move, and it's a bold move bringing in a 38-year-old former villain to try to help you win for 1 year. But moving off of one of the Splash Brothers, that would be an even bigger move.
And I know if you're hearing this, you're going, what? Come on, guys. Come on. I mean, there's some people that are just so tied to Klay Thompson and are kind of, I don't want to say casual fans, but they're not in on every nuance. And they're like, come on, this is a ridiculous conversation. And I get that. Believe me, I get that. But just think about it for a second, just for the sake of discussion. If Klay Thompson comes back and you get very few things you can do with him. He's got one more year in his contract. If he wants the money in the neighborhood of the contract that he's making, I don't think the Warriors want to pay that. And then if he walks away at the end of the year, I don't think the Warriors can replace him. Like, that's it. They're over the cap. So if he leaves, he leaves, and they will get nothing for him. And it will be 1 year of Klay Thompson, and then he leaves, and that's it. So, and then what's his mindset if you did? How's Klay going to be if you told him, hey, we want you to make $20 million instead of $43 million?
Right.
I think his headspace is so bothered by that I think that he could maybe accept that better in a different room than this room. In this room, I think he loses face. I think he feels insulted. He feels, slighted. And it's like, hey, man, I delivered you rings, and now you're doing this to me. And I think he's a very powerful presence, and I don't think they want to insult him. I don't think they want to have him in anything but the right mindset and frame of mind. And then I don't think they want to extend him at that price. So then it's a matter of letting him walk. If you let him walk, you're getting nothing. So, I mean, I think it does make sense on a lot of fronts. And I even think Kuminga might be part of the deal. And that scares me too, because, I think Kuminga's got a huge amount of potential. But if you put those two assets together, now there's any number of possibilities. You're talking Pascal Siakam and OJ Anunoby from Toronto. You're talking Karl Anthony Towns from Minnesota. You're talking maybe to the Clippers for
Dame
Paul
Lillard
George.
out of Portland.
Kawhi Leonard or Paul George at a.
I'm looking at the list
Clipper
of guys who make about what Klay makes, and Kawhi Leonard is in that neighborhood. Damian Lillard is in that neighborhood. Paul George is in that neighborhood. These are the types of players. Now, if you wanted to get Damian Lillard, I think you're talking about multiple assets going back to make the trade worthwhile for Portland. But it's interesting, Larry. From the 925, Larry Harris was alluding to the Paul trade without discussing it. And from the 415 on the Comcast business text line, I think you guys are totally misrepresenting or misinterpreting it. I think he's talking about retaining Draymond and the CP3 trade. That could be, but I also hear him talking about other things that could be coming in terms of Joe Lacob wanting to make this team right now better for this year and going forward. Because you and I talked about it. If you take the core as is and you can include Draymond Green and you can include the two drafted rookies, you don't have PBJ, you don't have Rollins, you add in Moody and Kuminga, is your 9-man rotation, including GP2 and Kevon Looney, along with the other core 5 guys that we've all talked about ad nauseum, is that team good enough to compete for an NBA championship? I don't think that it is.
Yeah. The only way it is if Jonathan Kuminga becomes a mega star while in the summer. If he works on his game and all of a sudden he becomes Kawhi Leonard and all of a sudden he becomes some incredible player that's far greater than what he is now. Otherwise, it's illogical to think that you're going to make a run at this thing. Sacramento's getting better. There's other young teams in the West that are getting better. And then you've got Denver. You got the entire Denver team in their prime. You didn't even get to Denver, and now you've got a core of old Chris Paul, old Steph Curry, old Draymond Green, old Klay Thompson. These guys are going to be approaching 35 years of age. They're the one group of players that's going to get better as they age, right? So that's not realistic. So I just think that if they, they're in a tough spot. I think they did the right thing in the draft. They took 2 good young players, and I think they'll do the right thing at the minimum level free agents, and they may even get the best minimum level free agents. But that's not moving the needle
right
as far as winning a championship.
Well, veteran minimum guys tend to be making the veteran minimum because they're no longer key core starting pieces on championship teams. They're either really good players at the last gasp end of the road in their NBA career, or they're middling guys who are looking for that last contract before maybe they flash and get another significant deal or another deal of some size to another team. You're not going to find a player who can come in and start for you as a championship caliber team. You're looking for an 8th, 9th, or 10th man, basically.
They almost always have a proverbial flaw, right? Either they don't play D, they don't play offense, they can't block shots, they can't defend, they can't do. There's something that makes them a minimum level guy. And we threw out some names. I mean, I think Dunleavy says he wants a perimeter shooting big, which makes a lot of sense. But I looked at the list. Realistically, I mean, you're talking about Mo Wagner, you're talking about Frank Kaminsky, you're talking about Mike Muscala, you're talking about guys like that at the minimum. And if you're talking about minimum wings, you're talking about like Stanley Johnson or Damian Lee or Justin Holiday or somebody like that. Joe Ingles, Lucas threw that one out. I mean, these guys are nice players to round out a bench, and they all have use. I really think Mo Wagner is a great competitor, but they're not the difference between beating the Denver Nuggets.
Yeah,
they're not. You're not going to the finals on the strength of Mo Wagner and Damian Lee.
And I think that Damian Lee, I think, is a veteran minimum guy, but I think that Ingles and Wagner are guys who will command more than the veteran minimum, which is less than $2 million or about $2 million a season. I think when we talk about veteran minimum players, too often we throw guys into that bucket who are going to end up getting more money. And if you're paying Mo Wagner, even if it's $4 million a year, that turns out to be closer to 20 with your luxury tax penalties that you're already facing. So I think that as we go through this, and we'll play more from the Larry Harris piece from NBC Sports Bay Area coming up, but the more you think about it in terms of, yes, Joe Lacob wants to spend, I think he'd be more willing to spend big money in a Clay swap than he would bringing guys in for the veteran minimum who aren't really going to help him at all.